Welcome to Podcast Folklore, the podcast where we unravel the eerie threads of folklore, urban legends, and the supernatural. I'm your host Kaylee, and today we're delving into one of the most infamous modern legends, the tale of the crying boy portraits. This unsettling story has its origins in post-war Europe, so it is one of our most modern tales, but it has influence across the world, leaving a trail of fear and mystery. We'll also explore similar legends involving crying children, asking what it is about this image that strikes fear into our hearts. So sit back, dim the lights, and let's dive into the haunting world of the crying boy. The legend of the crying boy portraits begins in the 1950s, when a series of mass-produced prints began to appear in homes across Europe, particularly in the UK. These weren't just any paintings, they were portraits of sad, tear-streaked children, often boys with hauntingly large, sorrowful eyes. The artist himself dubbed the name Gypsy Cycle for the portraits, which depicted 20 portraits of crying boys. It's still unclear why the author named them so. The artist behind these portraits was Giovanni Bragolin, an Italian painter, though he was better known under his pseudonym, Bruno Amadio. His series of paintings came to be known as the Crying Boys. Amadio was one of the most mysterious artists of the mid-1900s. He painted over 60 portraits in this collection, from the 50s through to the 1980s, with each printed and reprinted and widely distributed through mass productions, proving this to be one of his most popular series. The paintings quickly became popular among the working class families who could afford this inexpensive form of print. However, what started as an innocent piece of art soon took on a darker connotation. Many started to question whether Amado specifically frightened the boys and then painted them, with some even going as far to liken Amado to the devil himself. You see, in 1985, the British tabloid The Sun published an eerie article titled "Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy." According to the article, a couple named Ron and May Hall had lost their home in a fire, but strangely, one item remained intact amidst all the ashes: their crying boy portrait. The couple recalled hearing from a firefighter that he had encountered numerous other cases where a crying boy painting had survived fires in houses, totally unscathed. A couple of days later, the Sun turned its attention to Heswall, where an explosion had struck the home of Amos family. 2 copies of the crying boy, both barely damaged, were retrieved from the living room and dining room, but did not remain intact for long. It was reported that Mr. Amos destroyed them, fearing that it was the fault of the crying boy that caused the damage to their home. This wasn't an isolated incident. Soon people across the UK started reporting similar stories. Homes destroyed by fire. But the crying boy portraits were left untouched, unscathed from the fire. The legend grew quickly, fueled by media reports and the public's fear. Some claimed that the boy in the painting was an orphan who had died in the fire, and his spirit was cursed, bringing misfortune to anyone who displayed his image. Others speculated that the artist himself had cursed the paintings, or that the subjects were children who had died under tragic circumstances, their sorrowful spirits trapped within the artwork to stay there for all time. But how did this theory come to be just from a print of a painting? And why did they take hold so strongly in the public's imagination? And why did the artist curse such paintings when himself had lost his studio in a fire? Was it the consequence of his actions that caused this? There's little concrete evidence to suggest that these children were real orphans, although some speculate that Bregolin may have used local children as models. David Clarke, an investigative journalist, says that stories naming one child as Don Bonillo or Diablo did not emerge until 2000, in a book by Tom Sleman. One theory about the painting's supposed invulnerability to fire is rooted in a more mundane explanation. This is provided by Steve Punt, a British writer and comedian who investigated the curse in a BBC4 production called Hunt PI, along with one of the firefighters who also thought that it is possible that the prints were treated with a special varnish that made them more resistant to flames. Additionally, these portraits were typically hung in living rooms or kitchens, places where fires are more likely to start. It's possible that their survival in house fires is purely coincidental. Despite these rational explanations, the legend has persisted, particularly because it played on deep-seated fears about the randomness of disaster and the potential for malevolent forces to lurk in the everyday objects we bring into our homes. The idea of crying children as harbingers of doom or symbols of tragedy is not unique to the crying boy paintings. Throughout history, there are numerous examples of weeping children playing central roles in folklore and ghost stories around the world. Take, for instance, the legend of La Llorona from Latin American folklore. The Weeping Woman, as she's also known, is said to be the spirit of a woman who drowned her own children in a fit of madness or despair. Depending on the version of the story, after realizing the horror of her actions, she is condemned to wandering the earth, forever searching for her lost children and wailing in grief. Her cries are often heard near rivers and are considered an omen of death or misfortune to those who hear them. In Japanese folklore, the story of Zashiki Warashi, a child spirit that inhabits old houses. These spirits are often depicted as small children, sometimes crying, and are believed to bring both good and bad luck. While their presence can bring fortune to a household, their departure is often followed by disaster, reflecting the dual nature of children as both blessings and potential sources of sorrow in the supernatural realm. Even in Western literature and ghost stories, the image of a crying child is frequently used to invoke a sense of lost innocence or unresolved tragedy. The sound of a child crying in an empty house is a classic horror trope, representing something deeply unsettling, a cry for help that can never be answered. So what is it about crying children that resonates so strongly with us? Psychologically, children are symbols of innocence and vulnerability. When they appear in distress, it triggers a protective response in us, that natural duty of care. But when these images are twisted, such as in the case of the crying boy or La Llorona, tap into our primal fears, the fear of helplessness, the loss of innocence, and the randomness of misfortune. Even today, the legend of the crying boy endures. While many dismiss it as mere superstition, there are still those who refuse to hang these portraits in their homes, fearing the curse. Some have even gone as far to destroy the paintings in an attempt to break the cycle of bad luck that they bring. There was a call for residents who read local newspapers to send in copies for a mass bonfire. Whether you believe in the curse or not, there's no denying the impact that this story has on a particular culture. It's a perfect example of how urban legends can take on a life of their own, spreading fear and fascination in equal measure. The crying boy portraits are more than just art. They are a reflection of our deepest anxieties about the fragility of life and the mysterious forces that might shape our destinies. One alteration to change that perception of a sweet child to a crying, distressed infant changes an entire viewpoint. In the end, the crying boy is a symbol of the unknown, for some of that which we cannot control or fully understand. Whether you refuse to accept the reasoning for a series of events or a mere coincidence, It is something that varies depending on your viewpoint, but you have to agree the vivid image it portrays in our imagination. It continues to haunt us, reminding us that even in our modern world, some mysteries, despite how modern science and logic can seem to solve them, will never be accepted, and the folklore will always prevail as the truth. And so the story of the Crying Boy portraits continues to captivate and terrify us. A strange blend of art, tragedy, and superstition. Whether these tales are simply coincidence or something more, they remind us of the powerful role that folklore and urban legends play in our lives. They shape our fears, our beliefs, and sometimes even our actions. Thank you for joining me on this eerie journey into the legend of the Crying Boy portraits. So, dear listeners, this brings us to the end of the story for the evening. Be sure to listen to Folklore Extra, where Chris and I delve deeper into the psyche and the myth and discuss its impact. If you enjoy our content, we're a small channel and most of our listeners, a whopping 96% of you, are not subscribed. So please subscribe and join us on our odd adventures into the world of folklore, myth and legend. Until next time, explore the world with wonder.